summer school seminar. I wish I could have been there with you, but I suppose the video conference format will let us determine how relevant the new media are to the academic context. My presentation is a bit of an outlier in comparison to your focus on the European Union, but I hope that this case study about Russia's natalism will be a useful contribution to the comparative look at demographics. "One child is good, but two are better," reads the caption on a Russian natalist poster. Yet the latter is not from the recent government drive to boost that country's birth rates, but was published in 1968. Such natalist advertising has actually existed for about 100 years, and the recent Vladimir Putin-initiated campaign continues the tradition of state involvement in the matters of the family. The question of plunging birth rates in Western Europe is normally considered only within the framework of the modern, liberal democratic welfare state, rather than dealing with the survival of a certain indigenous ethnic group or groups per se. That is to say, the welfare state's primary goal is to continue replenishing its existent population of tax-paying citizens with the next generation thereof, because their combined wealth allows the state to maintain many social benefits, such as health care, that it offers in exchange for significant taxation levels. In this sense, who these citizens are or where they come from matters less than whether they're paying taxes. In a number of ways, the contemporary natalist policies instituted by the Russian government are also rooted in similar concerns. In fact, the most recent example thereof was the International Monetary Fund's and the World Bank's recommendation that Russia raise its retirement age to 63, from 55 for women and 60 for men, in order to tighten fiscal policy in light of pessimistic demographic predictions and meet Western European country standards. Specifically, poor demographic indicators for Russia have included high abortion and divorce rates, lowered life expectancy, and modest birth rates since the late 1980s, early 1990s. That said, contemporary Russian citizens enjoy fewer government-instituted social benefits in contrast to the Soviet period. But the taxation level is also relatively low, a flat rate of 13% as of 2001. Only certain types of healthcare are covered by the state budget, and government-issued pensions are quite small, to name just a few. In contrast, the USSR social programs comprised numerous benefits, ranging from near-guaranteed employment and pensions to free post-secondary education if you could pass the entrance exams, and healthcare. Yet, there is another significant reason why Russia's demographics have been at the center stage since the second Putin presidency. That reason is the specifics of the country's geography directly linked to geopolitics. Russia is the largest country in the world in terms of area, literally spanning from sea to sea, as the Latin expression goes, and in possession of vast natural resources, such as oil, gas, and strategic minerals. Its population is unevenly distributed. Unsurprisingly, the highest concentration is found in cities, in the European part of the continent, with vast areas to the east having a lower population density. In light of these two factors, Russia's resource-filled lands have been subject to persistent outside threat. The so-called heartland theory, postulated in the early 1900s by English geographer Halford Mackinder, stated that he who controls the so-called heartland controls the world, and the heartland is an area that corresponds to Russian rule of Eurasia. Historically, from the 1918 Allied intervention, which involved countries such as Japan, China, US, Britain, France, and Canada against the Bolsheviks, but also defending their own interests in Siberia, to the Third Reich concept of living space in Eastern Europe, certain principles of the heartland theory have been present in geopolitics for over a century. Currently, for instance, despite the warm Chinese-Russian relations in BRICS and beyond, some Russian demographers and journalists alike claim that China's enormous population represents another potential threat, especially in the borderland regions. Many illegal migrants live and work on Russian territories in Siberia and the Far East, with estimates ranging from hundreds of thousands to certain sensationalist claims as high as several million. Therefore, natural population growth rather than the kind induced through immigration, as well as the question of population density and distribution, have been the subject of concern for the Russian government in the last decade. The former resulted in a variety of pronatalist policies since 2006, the best known one being maternal capital, to which I'll get back to in a number of minutes. The government is also investigating ways in which ethnic Russians left behind in the former Soviet republics, or those living in the West, such as myself and elsewhere, can develop greater ties to their homeland, including the possibility of repatriation. The issue of making Russia east of the Ural Mountains more attractive for settlement is being addressed through a number of initiatives, such as infrastructural development for the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference in the Far East in September of this year, recent visits to the Coral Islands by the former President Medvedev, security and trade integration questions through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and others. Prior to discussing contemporary demographic solutions and their sustainability, I'd like to have a brief look at the history of Russia's natalism. The country, by definition, is a contiguous empire, the construction of which had been quite unlike the European colonial paradigm in the sense that the Russian expansion since the 16th century had generally been marked by flexible pragmatism, rather than the massive civilizing initiatives of Western Europeans. As a result, the Russian Empire was a true multinational imperium, as certain historians refer to it, into which many different people had been incorporated. This imperium encompassed dozens of ethnicities, and despite the common assumption, 57% of the population was actually of non-Russian origin. Generally speaking, these ethnic minorities stayed in the area of their geographic origin, in part facilitated by Russia's sheer size, some exceptions notwithstanding, including urban centers that attract many different kinds of people, Stalin-era resettlement, and so on. In the 19th century Russian Empire, large families were desirable for two reasons. First, much like elsewhere, having several children ensured that at least some of them survived into adulthood, at a time when many detrimental health-related factors, such as epidemics, played a prominent role. Second, for much of the Slavic population, and I'm referring to Russian, Eastern Ukrainians, and so forth, procreation occurred within the Orthodox Christian context, in which large family size was also preferable. For them, there was a certain sense of shared responsibility to having children, which was not one of the state, but one of faith. In the first decade after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Soviet government maintained a policy of official discrimination against the Russians in order to combat what it saw as Great Russian chauvinism. In Marxist ideology, nationalism distracted the working class from its real struggle against the bourgeoisie. Yet, in the 1930s, the state began promoting the culture of various nationalities comprising the USSR, as they were called, Russians among them, realizing the sheer mobilizing potential of ethnic and regional nationalism. When it comes to the question of the family, the Soviet government exhibited a great degree of interest in natalism, although its specific treatment changed. Much like the pronatalist concern in the modern states in the West between World War I and World War II, the USSR sought to manage its citizens on an unprecedented level, ranging from setting an adequate level of education, culture, and even taste, to dictating attitudes towards their bodies, including the questions of hygiene and reproduction. In the 1920s, the Bolsheviks attempted to adhere to classic Marxism in the arena of the family as well. This meant getting rid of patriarchal gender roles, legalizing abortion, and making divorce procedures simpler, among others. Certain radical figures viewed the family institution itself, as it was linked to traditional Christian morality, as remnants of the bourgeois past that had to be discarded, with the worker state gaining a prominent role in raising children communally. The state did become more involved, but in the 1930s, the egalitarian measures from the previous decade were replaced by top-down traditionalism, in which the state acted as the civilizer, including the reintroduction of ethnic heroes and classics in arts, music, and education, In light of the dramatically increased literacy level for which it was also responsible, the state also made vast improvements in the areas of hygiene, fighting epidemic diseases, and infant mortality. For the family, this meant a return to a somewhat patriarchal family values, but not in terms of pre-revolutionary property rights of the patriarchs. Sobriety, as well as pro-natalist propaganda coupled with a ban on abortion, difficult to obtain divorces, and mockery of irresponsible husbands. This change was especially noticeable in visual culture. Some historians describe how the late 1920s, early 1930s imagery depicted women in a rather gender-neutral manner, normally performing some kind of labor. By contrast, by the mid to late 1930s, the emphasis on femininity re-entered social advertising. In part, the state-instituted traditionalism was a practical solution to the drop in fertility perpetuating a population crisis in the 1930s, which greatly concerned Soviet demographers. The crisis was caused by a number of factors, including the 1932-33 famine and the elimination of female unemployment as a result of industrialization and collectivization drive in agriculture. With women entering the workforce in such a radical manner in a short time period, the government took over the role of childcare, starting as early as nursery schools around the tender age of 2 or even earlier. The next decade saw the establishment of the heroic mother, literally Mother Heroine Medal, in 1944, as well as 2 other lesser medals for similar achievements for those women with 10 or more living children, naturally born or adopted. The lowest ranking award, the Medal of Motherhood, commemorated those with 5 to 7 children. This type of recognition symbolized one of the ways in which the state chose to combat the massive loss of life during the course of World War II, which is normally estimated at 24 to 26 million. After the war, the ratio of men to women was rather skewed, which caused additional problems. At this time, pro-natalist propaganda intensified. By the mid-1990s, 5.5 million women had been awarded one of the 3 motherhood medals. It is important to note that coercive methods like the aforementioned collectivization of peasants in the countryside have certainly been used to meet the USSR's economic, political, and social goals. In fact, some Western historians call the 1930s ban on abortion an effort to enforce motherhood and argued that Stalinist propaganda reduced the view of women to that of mothers. Yet, there was another aspect to natalism in this period. Many people in the USSR shared a particular mindset, a sense of unity that was solidified during World War II, and truly believed in the importance of collectively contributing to one's country and its future, surpassing individual whim. And it is that kind of a context that natalism should be looked at. Pro-natalist social advertising continued throughout the majority of the Soviet period. Many examples targeted proper childcare, in which the government played an active role while the mother was at work, on the way to raising the new generation of well-educated, cultured, responsible, and healthy Soviet citizens. Another major demographic drop occurred toward the end of the Soviet period, around the time of perestroika, with death exceeding births shortly after the collapse of the USSR. In the 1990s, in addition to such detrimental factors as lowered life expectancy, abortion and divorce rates had been described as the highest in the world by the United Nations. Considering the sheer turmoil of that period, ranging from questionable privatization of public assets during the so-called shock therapy years to hyperinflation, causing the destruction of lifetime savings for millions of people, the immediate assumption on the part of the government had been that the steady improvement of economic conditions would certainly create an increase in birth rates. So, in 2006, Putin made Russian demographics one of the central issues of his presidency during his address to the nation. Since then, the solutions to Russia's dire population predictions have primarily been of economic nature, such as the maternal capital program, which became operational in 2007. The latter involves various types of subsidies for women with more than one child, naturally born or adopted. This government aid package can only be spent on the child's education, pension investment, or the improvement of one's living conditions. Residential real estate, as we know, in the largest cities in Russia, such as Moscow and St. Petersburg, remains near the top of the most expensive list in the world. This factor alone impedes some people from having more than 1 or 2 children because they don't want to live in cramped conditions. In addition to direct financial aid, other programs included sociocultural propaganda, ranging from billboard advertising and holidays to television shows. One of such initiatives is the All-Russian Day of Family, Love, and Faithfulness, celebrated on July 8th. This is a typical example of a contemporary state project established in 2008, but with roots going back to traditional Russian culture, named after Saints Peter and Favronia, medieval patron saints of marriage and love. And while the holiday was instituted by a secular government, its very focus points to another player in this matter, the Russian Orthodox Church. A traditional pillar of Russian society, the Orthodox Church has experienced a true revival in the last 20 years, and has also been active in the demographic initiative. In addition to conventional measures, such as the construction of thousands of new places of worship, the Church has also embraced the new media, such as social networking, to spread its message of traditionalism to the internet generation. This institution sees the Russian population decline as part of the same trend affecting Europe, that is to say, historically Christian nations, regardless of their denomination, naming the ideology of materialist, individualist liberalism as the culprit. While traditional values and large families are also important to Russia's indigenous Muslim communities, such as those in the Northern Caucasus, these minorities have not been affected by the birth rate decline of the majority Russian population, since they share stricter patriarchal values and, in certain cases, polygamous family structure. In terms of current demographics, Russians comprise more than 3/4 of the population, up to 80%. Tatars are at about 4%, with many other ethnicities, including various North Caucasian representatives, each at 1 or 2% or less. Thus, it becomes obvious that it is the ethnic Russians that are the primary targets of the government's pro-natalist drive. After all, they are the founding people of the multi-ethnic imperium that is the contemporary Russian Federation. The latest data indicate that the years of Putin's leadership have had some successes. However, it is difficult to attribute them directly to the government's natalist policies as a cause and effect, rather than the overall stability of the first decade of the 21st century as compared to the Yeltsin era. According to Russia's statistical agency, abortion rates dropped considerably from 203 abortions for every 100 live births in 1995 to 74 per 100 in 2009. Of course, overall, the rate is still quite high. I have some data for June to December of 2011 and the first 4 months of 2012 listed on page 7 of your handout, so I won't read them out, but it suffices to say that if the overall trends described there continue, then the annual population decline for 2012 will be half of that for 2011. Despite such positive news, the sustainability of these policies remains to be seen. One of the most significant roadblocks is the time when those born in the late 1990s, the lowest point in the graph, reach childbearing age and start their own families. It would be very difficult for them to compensate for the population loss and to create a positive demographic trend under current sociocultural conditions. Indeed, the cultural approach to demographics mentioned earlier, whether that of the secular government or of religious institutions, underscores the importance of changing the fundamental mindset of the people, which no amount of money can buy. After all, the Scandinavian welfare state model is often described as an ideal in terms of social benefits and a high standard of living, yet this region has not been able to avoid the decline of its indigenous population. It seems to me that this change can only occur through a certain return to traditionalism. For some, the framework of a religious institution may have a positive effect. For others, it may be of more secular nature, one that subordinates the individual to the community for the common good of the nation, as was the case in post-war USSR. But traditionalism in this context is often misunderstood as a caricature of a nuclear family in which the woman is tied to the home with no opportunities in the public sphere, while the man is the sole breadwinner. Undoubtedly, this is unattractive to many contemporary women who find fulfillment outside the home, including those wanting to start a family of their own at the same time. Also, beyond the question of choice, only some can afford that lifestyle. More realistically, in the world when two incomes are an economic necessity for most, it is the extended family that gains prominence. Apart from the state's increased role in child-rearing in the last 100 years, historically, this has been the case in the USSR and now in Russia. Due to the combination of factors, close living quarters in the urban environment, somewhat limited geographic mobility, that is to say many people stay in the same place for generations, and relatively early retirement age for women, extended family members, especially grandmothers, have been able to be quite involved in their grandchildren's lives, as the mother had the opportunity to continue working full-time and having more children. It is this clan-like, close-knit family structure in the modern context that promises to be beneficial for an upward demographic turn if one were to occur. In the grand scheme of Russian history, there have been times when the country lost millions of people in the course of war, but was able to recover. For a variety of reasons, the communal survival instinct kicked in. Whether the same occurs under current conditions, only time will tell. Again, thank you for having me at the summer school seminar. If you have any questions pertaining to this presentation, you're welcome to email me at the address listed on the last page of your handout.